Good afternoon, everybody. It's 2 o'clock here. Thank you for joining us for a third installment of some BLN training for our correspondent lending program. My name is Chris Dorin. I'll be on the call with you today with Jacob Therrien of Bridge Loan Network. We're going to give it a few more minutes as people are still looking like they're logging in here. So we'll aim to start about 2:03 in the afternoon. Thank you, everybody. Okay, good afternoon again, everybody. Thank you for being patient as we get started. We had a number of people join in addition. So again, welcome to our third installment of training here that we're doing for our correspondent lending partners. My name again is Chris Dorn. I'm the sales manager at RCN Capital. We also have with us today Jacob Therrien of Bridge Loan Network, who will be kind of splitting the time with me here. I wanted to point out a couple of things for you guys today as we get started. First, this will be recorded, so if you had team members of yours who work with the system but maybe couldn't attend today, we'll be happy to provide a copy of the recording to anybody who needs it. The other part I want to mention to you guys is within the GoToWebinar toolbar there, you guys also have the opportunity to ask questions. Erica Sykowski of our marketing team will be monitoring the questions that come through, and those will be answered as we get towards the end of the program here. If you guys do have questions, though, please feel free to ask. If it's on your mind, odds are it's on somebody else's mind as well. And so what we want to do today is start off with covering some of our initial documents that we're looking to collect on these files so that they can move in rapid succession from the get-go. All right, so as we get off here, the first thing that I have on the screen for you guys is a document checklist that we're going to have for pre-approval and appraisal order. So this is what the ideal situation would be, that we would collect all these items up front so that once this file is submitted into RCN, we can review the documents that come through. We can give ourselves the ability to check the credit and background and basically prepare the file for everything we need in order to get that appraisal ordered. And if you guys say you're good with the appraisal order, we can get started right away on that. This way we're not waiting or going back and forth between the two trying to collect documents. If we can get all this stuff up front, once your file is submitted and reviewed, we can go right to the appraisal order. And we want to cut down the timeline it takes for that initial back and forth, because one of the biggest delays we have when we go from we start from the beginning of the loan process to the end of the loan process is how long did it take us to get a couple of things ordered. And those couple of things are title and appraisal. Those are the ones that really take up the most time during the loan process. So if we can eliminate any of the kind of stuff that happens beforehand that slows us down, that'll allow us to make sure that those things will be in on time by whatever date we need to close on. So first and foremost, we would want to get a loan application or at least the credit authorization to be able to run credit in the Bridge Loan Network system. So for fix and flip deals, we actually don't need to have a full application. For 30-year loans, we do. But it does help to have the full application if we can get it. If you can't, though, you want to make it a little bit shorter. One of the best things you can do is to make sure that the borrower provides an authorization for the credit pull. So once we have that, we can run credit on our end and make sure that the borrower is going to be qualified for the loan. In addition to that, for fix and flips, rehab budgets are a big part of the process that we're going to have, especially for the appraisal order itself. When we place that appraisal order, we need to have a rehab budget ready to go so that the appraiser can review that as part of their process. If that rehab budget includes things like the borrower putting an addition on the property, so square footage expansion of the property, or perhaps they're converting it, maybe it's going to be a single family, it's going to turn into a 2 or 3 family, or vice versa, or if they're going to do a condo conversion, we would want to be alerted about that up front. And any kind of foundation repairs, give us a heads up there as well. Foundation repairs can be impactful as part of the loan process. If they are deemed to be structural repairs, we will ask that the borrower gets a structural engineer to actually come and visit the property and sign off on that. If it's just a cosmetic repair, say they're just putting like a sealant or something on the foundation, that does not require a structural engineer to review. But if we can be alerted about these things up front, if you guys can provide any kind of plans or drawings for the project, if there's going to be any kind of changes to the layout or the floor plan of the property, that would also be a big help, because that's going to help the appraiser. And when it comes to these rehab budgets, you really want them to be pretty detailed. We provide you guys with a couple of different templates for single family and for multifamily properties. I would encourage you guys to use those, but it's okay if you have a budget that comes from on a different format or from a different source. Sometimes it comes directly from a contractor. But what you want to do is you want to make sure that the rehab budget they're providing actually has some level of detail to the work that's being put into it. When we see appraisals that come in with low values, where the ARV didn't hit the mark, it's usually because, of a couple of things. Either, the appraiser just missed their mark, but the other issue that we can control is the rehab budget that we got was just too generalized, right? So we'll see ones that come in and it just says, kitchen, $12,000. So the appraiser really doesn't know what's going to happen to the kitchen. They're not going to assume that it's going to be, a certain level of finish that maybe the borrower is assuming that it's going to be. So if we can get information in there about what specifically they're doing in the kitchen, are they doing flooring, cabinets, countertops, appliances, light fixtures, whatever, if they can break that down on the line items, that makes a huge difference. And that'll also help the appraiser visualize what the property is going to look like when it's all said and done. And that's going to give us a better chance of hitting that value that we're looking for. Another thing that our appraiser friends have let us know too is if the borrower has, previous projects and they have pictures of properties they've done in the past, the appraiser is happy to look at those pictures, and we'll be able to actually provide those to the appraiser so the appraiser can see what kind of work is typical for this investor. So all those things that you can do on the front end there are going to help make sure that the value comes in at the price point that we're looking for. The purchase contract is also another great item we can get up front. It's not a must-have for an appraisal order on a fix and flip loan, but it is a piece of the documentation that we really would like to get up front just to make sure that there's no issues there based on when the set closing date is, or if there's any issues with the people who signed the contract, or maybe the name of the buyer on the contract, or if there's any seller concessions, things like that. So we want to make sure, if possible, we can get that up front as well. The point of contact for the appraisal, this one is again a requirement for us to be able to actually place the appraisal order. So if you can get that over to us as part of your initial submission package, that'll again speed up the process from when we get the package to when we can actually place the appraisal order. And the same goes for the title or attorney contact that the borrower is going to use. We're happy to use any attorney that the borrower might have or title agent that they have. They get their own choice there. If they need to get a recommendation from us, if they don't have somebody, we'll be happy to look into that and see if we can find somebody. But again, if we can get that information up front, that starts that process a lot faster and allows for more likelihood that title will be ready by the time we're looking to close. Bank statements, always good to have these up front to make sure that the borrower has sufficient liquidity to cover down payment, closing costs, and reserves. As some of you guys have seen, borrowers will, it's probably happened to all of us at some point, they'll tell you up front, yes, I got the money for it, yes, yes, yes. And then they actually submit the paperwork and the money's not there, or the money is coming from some third-party source that we were unaware of, and that can have an impact on the loan. So if we get that up front, that's another thing where we'll know up front whether that's going to be an issue or not, and we can be confident moving forward. And lastly, for the appraisal order itself, I would certainly encourage on the loan sizes that are going to be under $400,000 to use one of the hybrid products if we have a fast turnaround time for closing date. The iValue Net 55, which is currently the go-to product for us on those smaller fix and flip deals. Those are ordered through the Accurate Group appraisal company. Accurate Group has been turning those around in about 4 or 5 business days very consistently, and it is just a flat fee of $400. So again, the speed and the consistency of the price there really make a big difference for what we're seeing as far as timelines go. Those are generally going to be available in urban markets or markets surrounding major urban markets. There will be some places that it doesn't apply. Same goes for the ANX, which is also a hybrid product. Again, faster and cheaper on those ones, but they're not necessarily available in every market. So check with your loan officer on those. If those are not options, or if we have a larger loan size to the project, then we would be looking for the more traditional 1004 or 1025 appraisal, depending on the property unit count. The 1004 is just your standard single family appraisal. We'll get that as is plus ARV. You can also get a rent schedule with that at 1007 if the borrower intends to hold the property as a long-term rental after they finish the rehab. For the 2 to 4 family properties, that's a 1025 appraisal. The 216 is the operating income statement. Again, we can get those as is in ARV. If this happens to be a scenario that does not include rehab, we would basically look for all the same information, just short of the rehab budget and plans. And we will make all these forms are available to you guys as well, so you can give this to your team and have a checklist ready to go so that your team knows what they should be putting into the file on the front end. A lot of you guys are taking advantage of the 30-year rental product that we offer. So these are available options for purchase, rehab, refi, and cash out. On those ones, any of the 30-year products that we offer, we want to make sure that we are we are collecting a full application on the front end. The application itself, if you get our form filled out, also includes a credit authorization. So if it's fully filled out and signed by the guarantor, we can actually use that for the credit authorization. If it's a leased property, we do want to get a copy of the lease. That will be required for the appraisal order as well. So if we can get the lease up front, that'll allow us to jump to the appraisal a lot quicker. If it is a purchase transaction, we will want to collect the purchase contract up front on the 30 years for the appraisal order. And again, we're looking for the point of contact for access to the property for the appraisal, the borrower's attorney or title contact information. And again, all we need here, just name, phone number, and an email address. That's sufficient. Bank statements, again, always good to get these up front. And when it comes to the appraisal orders on these ones, we're only looking at the standard appraisal forms. The hybrids will not apply to the 30-year product. So we need to make sure that when these are getting placed, we are using the full order. So that'd be the 1004 or the 1025. Those will require a income statement to come with them. So to analyze the cash flow. So if it's a single family, that'll be the 1007 market rent addendum form. On the 1025, again, that's the 216 operating income statement. We will also order a tax certificate with those. The tax certificate will give us what the annual taxes are down to the penny, so that we don't have to rely on the title agent maybe giving us partial information about what the actual taxes are, as has happened in the past. The exception for that is Pennsylvania. That's the one state where we can't get the tax certs. So on those ones, we will have to try to work with the title agent to make sure we get the proper annual taxes so we can lock in our numbers for escrow. And for every appraisal that we order, we also make sure we get a flood certificate just to make sure if the property is in a flood zone or not. If it is in a flood zone, then we will need to proceed with getting flood insurance for that property. This one is for purchases on the 30-year loan. Again, a lot of the same information here. We just want to highlight that we're adding in the purchase contract as one of the required documents. This will be required for the appraisal order. One of the other things that we want to get is if we can get a pro forma financial statement showing what the borrower projects the rents, taxes, and insurance to be. That is also very helpful to make sure we can get those initial loan quotes quoted out properly. So for a lot of you guys, hopefully you're using the online pricing tool to help price these out. But if you're not, make sure you're providing this information over to your loan officer on the RCN side so we can get that sorted out up front, make sure the borrower is comfortable with the proper pricing, and then decide if we want to move forward with the appraisal or not. The last checklist I want to cover for you guys is going to be applicable to any 5+ multifamily apartment buildings or any mixed-use properties that we might be looking at. So as some of you guys have seen, we are more conservative on this particular asset class than we are on the 1 to 4 family properties. So don't be surprised if you get a little bit more pushback up front on these. The timeline for closing on these is a lot longer as well. These are about 4 to 6 weeks, best case scenario. The appraisals take longer on these. Everything just takes a little bit longer. And there's a lot more reports that we have to order. And there's a little more due diligence done on the front end. So we want to make sure that we're putting our best foot forward. We want to see if we can get this kind of documentation up front. And then I'll start with the application or credit authorization. Again, application would be preferred if we can get it, but it is not a requirement for this product, only the 30-year. If they're doing any rehab to the property, again, we want to get a copy of that rehab budget and any permits or plans, anything that might be applicable to the property as far as expansion or conversions or anything like that might go. If it's a purchase, again, we want to see if we can get that purchase contract up front. Point of contact for access and title, same on those, no different there. Bank statements, again, same there. Pro forma financial statement or a rent roll. These will be important documents for us to get up front. We want to make sure that the property is going to have sufficient cash flow in order for it to qualify for our product. There is a cash flow component required on those properties. If it's a rehab loan, the cash flow requirement will be viewed based on the after repair value and the future rents and taxes and insurance after the rehab is completed. So again, that's why we want to get that pro forma one. There are a number of fees to be collected on the 5+ multis and mixed use products. Couple of them are standard, couple of them only apply to certain scenarios. So we want to check with our loan officers on those to make sure we're covering those up front. Some of the standard documents that'll apply to every single multifamily or mixed use property that we do Number one, the environmental screening report. This is a $150 charge. It's the first thing we're going to order and collect on the file. And basically what that's going to do is going to give us a 1-day turnaround, and we're going to see if there's any history of environmental issues with that property or the surrounding area. As long as it doesn't indicate any serious issues for us, that's the end of our environmental screening. If it does indicate there might be some issues with the environmental concerns around the property, at that point we might have to trigger a phase 1 or a mini phase 1 environmental study to see if there's a greater issue there. Obviously, the big concern for us as a lender there is being stuck with a property that has a serious environmental issue. If any of you guys have dealt with those in the past, they can be very expensive and time consuming to clean up and get removed from a property. So that's not something that we're very interested in being a part of if we can help it. Feasibility studies or an engineering feasibility study for heavy rehabs. These will only be required on your more heavy rehab projects. Loans where you have 500,000 or more in rehab work to be done, loans where we would have an expansion or conversion issue with the property, those sort of things. PCA is a property condition assessment. This will only be required if the property has 3 or more stories and 10 or more units. Both of those conditions should be met in order to have that PCA requirement on there. The commercial narrative appraisal, this will be ordered on every single one of these scenarios. The commercial narrative appraisal is going to be our full appraisal report. It's done by an MAI appraiser. MAI appraisers are kind of like your master's degree for appraisers. Some states only have a few people who are licensed to do those kinds of appraisals. As such, we'll see a bit of a slow turn time in those areas. Typical turn time I see is usually around 3 weeks, give or take. So you want to set proper expectations with your clients that the timeline is going to be a little bit longer than what we would see on our typical fix and flip for 1 to 4 families. The last component that we would collect, once the appraisal report is in, there is a secondary appraisal review done by a company called Citus. That is a $500 fee and a 3 business day turnaround time to get that report back. So once the appraisal's in, we know we have good numbers and the borrower wants to move forward. That's when we're going to collect that fee for the Citus report, and we'll place the order once the fee is paid. After we get our review back from the Citus company, as long as there's no issues with the appraisal, if we have everything for documentation, at that point we can then go into the final underwriting of the file and get it approved. Make sure you and your team all have a copy of this. These checklists, again, these will be available to you guys just like we have the recordings, but we want to make sure we're giving you guys a little bit of a cheat sheet up front to kind of get these things off the ground and moving. Because as we said, the critical components of the timeline here are making sure we get the appraisal ordered as fast as we can and the title. Again, we want to make sure we're moving forward on deals though that are good, approvable, workable deals for us. That's why we're kind of going to collect some of this other information beyond just the bare minimum for the credit for the appraisal order. If we can get all that information up front, that's really going to give us a better indication of if there's any issues here that might pop up down the road. Now, from here, we can go to our processing checklist. So once the appraisal's been ordered, we have this template available for you guys as well. And this is kind of a document checklist. If you guys have processors on your side or whoever's going to be processing the file with your counterpart here at RCN Capital, you want to make sure you're in good contact with those people and that we kind of go through a checklist here of our standard documentation that we'd be looking to collect on any given file. And so I would encourage you guys, if you're okay with paper forms, what have you, print out a stack of these and have one available for every file that you do, or you can do this electronically and kind of just fill in the blanks as you go. But it's a good idea to have your guarantor name and loan number up top, the borrowing entity, so whatever the guarantor's commercial borrowing entity is going to be, you put their name there. The lender on the file will be commercial lender. That's how these loans will close. Your estimated closing date would be good here, and the property address so you know which file you're talking about. And then from there, we'll have our kind of a checklist of the documentation that's needed for the file to make sure it's completed. Some of these are going to be very specific. For example, 5+ units, we have the Citus order and the environmental screening report. Leases might be applicable, say, on a 30-year, but not necessarily on a fix and flip. But this list is designed to kind of give you the broad strokes of the documentation that we're going to be looking for. On every file, we're going to be looking for the articles, operating agreement or bylaws, the entity status, the EIN. If it's a purchase, we need the purchase contract. If it's a refi, we need the payoff and a 6-month payment history. Any kind of bridge loan, we definitely want to get the borrower's experience because that'll play a factor into what kind of LTV we can offer and what kind of pricing they'll get. Again, if there's a rehab component to the scenario, we want to make sure we're getting that rehab list up front as well. So this will be a good way for you guys to kind of set your team up for tracking and success. You'll still be getting the document checklist emails from the loan processor on the RCN side to kind of help you keep up with these things. But this is a good way for you guys to have something so that you're at the ready when the borrower comes back to you directly and says, hey, what else do I need to provide here? And you can always go back to your previous checklist that you got from the processor on our side. But it's good to have your own kind of checklist here, or to provide something up front for your borrowers as here's what you can expect on this file coming through. You just want to make sure that you're giving them a list of documents that actually applies to the scenario. So if it's a purchase, you can eliminate the payoff and payment history. If it's a fix and flip, you don't have to worry about the 30-year kind of components, etc. Some of these documents here aren't documents that we're going to collect from the borrower themselves. These are going to be more internal documents or things that are going to be ordered throughout the process. For example, the appraisal, the loan sizer, the 30-year tax bill, and the flood cert. These are items that we would collect more internally. If it is in a flood zone, though, as I mentioned, then we would have to trigger the borrower to go get us flood insurance. And so you can have this as your checklist, and then you make your notes over here. You guys can edit this to your needs as needed. This doesn't constitute any and all potential conditions that a loan might have. As you guys know, each scenario is a little bit different in this world. So there may be certain things that pop up that are unique to a particular scenario. For example, there might be an underground oil tank that the borrower is looking to have removed. If that were the circumstance, then we would have some additional conditions for a soil sample test to be done to make sure it hasn't leaked into the ground, things like that. So it's not the end all be all, but this should be able to cover 99% of the loan scenarios that we're going to run through on a day-to-day basis. And again, the other items that maybe aren't going to follow up on there, standard-wise, would be provided through your document checklist by your processor on the RCN side. So if you guys have questions about this, I'll just remind you again, we do have the question feature within the chat box toolbar here. So if there's something that you guys are curious about or have questions about, pump your questions into there. Erica will be following up on those and making sure we circle back to those at the end of the day. Last thing I wanted to cover before we get jumping over to Jacob is we did have some updates to the pricing of the 30-year product. So I wanted to go over those, and we'll show you that within the loan calculator here. So I'm sure a number of you guys have seen this already, but if you haven't, the online pricing tool is a great way for your team to be able to price out deals yourself and to be able to produce term sheets for pre-approvals for your people. So if you have borrowers who are looking to get some sort of a quote sheet from you guys, this will actually help you do it for you. So all you need to do is choose the product. This will be for the 30-year rental. This particular scenario will be a purchase of a single family property. I've plugged in my appropriate property information here. Then all we need to do from there is hit calculate pricing. Sorry. Put this one in. Let's see. Oh, he's connected. Okay. And based on the inputs that we put into the left side columns here, the pricing tool will actually spit out an offer of terms for us. The offer of terms with the 30-year comes with buy down options. So if the borrower wants to pay 0 points to RCN as a lender, they can absolutely do that. The starting rate at that point would be 7.29%. If they feel like they would like to buy down the rate, they can certainly do that. Generally speaking, every 1 point they buy it down gets you a 0.5% discount on the rate. And that just kind of goes on down the list. The maximum buy down is 4 points to a rate here of 5.11%. The last column over here is going to show you how long it takes for the borrower to see a return on investment for paying the points. So if they did decide to buy down the rate, it would take just under 2.5 years for them to actually see the loan payments start to turn in their favor. So what that means is their upfront cost of paying 4 points after 2.5 years would be less than the interest they're going to be paying going forward from there. So they would see a total savings over the life of the loan after only 2.5 years. So in this particular scenario, this is a situation where I'd probably encourage the borrower to consider buying down the rate. I know that can get a little bit tricky when you have outside brokers and you're looking to get yourselves priced in there as well. We do have the broker rebate option on here as well, so you guys can get up to a 0.5 point broker rebate for selling a higher interest rate. So if I included that 0.5%, that would be paid to you outside the HUD. Nobody would see that. And you would be paid that 0.5 point in exchange for selling the higher pricing to the borrower. So that'll recalculate here in a second. There you go. So now you'll see the rate has jumped up on this. One of the other things I'd like to point out too, when it comes to these 30-year purchases and things like that, some of you might have noticed if you've been doing these in the past that the loan to value for purchases was previously at 75% of the as-is value up to 80% loan to cost. We've gotten rid of the two-step process there, and now it's just a flat 80% of purchase or as-is value, the lesser of the two. So that makes it a little bit easier for borrowers to qualify for the full 80%. Another thing I'll point out here. Yes, sir.
Chris, is that 720 FICO score the best score to get that rate?
That's the lowest score to qualify for the 80% of purchase. It will also qualify you for up to 75% on the cash out. Now that does mean we still have to hit our debt service coverage ratio minimum, which is 1.1. But as long as you do and you have a 720 plus credit score, that will get you to the highest tier LTV. You can get better interest rates if you have higher and higher credit. So for example, if they had 760 credit here, instead of being at 7.79, that should drop down a little bit. TikTok. And so that drops down to 749 now. So discounts will be provided for the higher credit scores, but 720 will be the minimum to get that 80% of purchase. Or if we're doing a cash out, I can switch this over here. Cash outs can now go up to 75% of loan to value. So previously those were capped at 70. Those will be at 75. That said, I want to make you aware that for borrowers with less than 720 credit scores, the LTVs are remaining the same still at this current time. So if you have like a 700 credit score, your max LTV on a cash out is still at 65. And on a purchase, you're still going to be at that 70-75 range. The pricing tool is, a big time saver for you guys. You don't have to go back and forth with your loan officer necessarily, unless there's something unique about the scenario. This will allow you guys to be able to price these out yourselves. You can save the pricing here. You can create the loan in the system, actually right from here too, with the click of a button. But the coolest part of it for me is downloading the term sheet. If you click download pricing, you will actually see a PDF file open up over here. And now that PDF file is going to contain white label information for your correspondent lending group. You'll have the loan information here, kind of recapping all the different terms. Down here, it will cover the closing costs and any kind of liquidity requirements. This one being a cash out, liquidity requirements a little bit different, but on a purchase side, you'll see the down payment requirement there and an estimate for the closing costs. I would highly encourage you and your team to get familiar with the online calculator, how it works, how to produce the term sheets. If you guys need assistance with that, Matt and Jacob on the BLN team are tremendous, walking you guys through that stuff and making sure that you know what you need to know to get these things priced properly. Again, putting in the proper information is job one here, though. If we don't put in the right information, that's going to definitely screw up the terms that we get on here, and you might wind up misfiring and giving the wrong quote to a borrower. So we want to make sure that we're covering that stuff up front. And again, if you guys, when you're submitting these files to your loan officer on the RCN side, if you guys can send us, a copy of the pricing that you used or a copy of the Excel version of the sizer that you used, that gives us a little bit more of a head start on these files as well, so that we know what you priced it out at, and we know what to be able to kind of set up the loan in our system for going forward. With that, I'll turn it over to Jacob. He's going to cover what we're looking for from you guys as far as what tasks you can do within the system, but also what your kind of general roles and responsibilities will be during the process, and what you can expect from the roles and responsibilities of the RCN team. Jacob, off to you.
Hey, Chris, too, before we send it over to
Sure.
Jacob, would it be okay if we answered a couple questions that came in
Yeah,
on the
absolutely.
document checklist?
Go right ahead.
Perfect. So the first question is there a dollar percentage amount that will also trigger a heavy rehab without the expansion or change of
Mhm.
use?
Yeah, 500,000 would be the threshold on that. You will also see it if you have a rehab budget that is greater than the purchase price. All of those will qualify as quote unquote heavy rehabs. So if you do have a client, let's say they're buying the property for 100 grand and they say, well, the rehab's going to be 100 grand too. I would probably coach them up to say, well, why don't you come in at 99 or something like that, any amount lower, because that'll result in better LTV for you. And not have to trigger the feasibility study requirement. The other thing I would say there, though, is be careful about how much you're asking a borrower to bring down their rehab budget. If they're buying it for 100,000, but their budget's 125, I probably don't want them shorting their budget by 20% or more in order to just meet that requirement. That could hurt their ability to get the project properly funded during the draw process, or that could hurt their ability to get the right value they're looking for from the appraiser. So if it's close, that's where we'll be okay trying to coach them to bring it under the purchase price. But if it's not very close, I would leave it the way it is and count it as that heavy rehab that it should be.
Thank you, Chris. And then what is the rule on properties that are not near a metro area? Like what is considered rural?
Sure. Well, rural and not near a metro area, a little bit different. So you can still get plenty of suburban properties that are going to qualify for a loan through RCN and the Bridge Loan Network program here, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's rural. For the ANX hybrid and for the iValueNet hybrid products that we have for appraisals, they're really looking for like major population centers. If you're near one of those, generally speaking, the hybrid report will be available, and we can do that $400 flat fee for the iVal, and we can turn that around in about 4 days. If we have, properties that are maybe not near a major metro center, but they're still considered suburban, we'll do those loans all day. We probably won't have the ability to use one of the hybrid reports. We'll have to get a full report for those ones. Rural properties, on the other hand, are not something that we cover. Most lenders in our space, at least on the national scale, aren't going to do them. Rural properties are defined as areas where there's 25% or less developed land. One of the ways that you can check this too, though, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau actually has a website, which I can pull up for you here. And it just says rural or underserved areas. You plug in the property address. So I got one here. Let's see where this one winds up. And it will tell me flat out yes or no if it's in a rural area or not. So this one's in upstate New York. Sometimes upstate New York comes back rural, sometimes it doesn't. This is a great tool for us to be able to check and see. One of the other things we can do is we can actually Google the property, because sometimes we're not totally sure about something, and we can actually look at the satellite imagery. And we're just looking to see how much of the area is actually developed land. So this is a very suburban area, lots of houses, lots of streets, commercial properties, etc. So this area would have no problem being considered a suburban market. That said, this is New York. As I get out into some of these other areas here, let's look at Port Gibson. There's not a whole lot here. You're going to have a couple of houses, but mostly what I'm seeing here is open land, farmland, trees, rivers, things like that. That's all undeveloped. Anything in this area would be considered rural. And so again, at the end of the day, it's sometimes left up to a little bit of a judgment of the appraiser. And so you might have a loan officer tell you up front, listen, it's borderline rural. It may come back that way, it may not. But at the end of the day, it's what the appraiser decides to designate that property that's going to dictate whether or not we can do that loan. So on any of those scenarios where it's a little bit borderline, I would certainly give your borrower a heads up that, like, listen, you're going to have to pay for the appraisal and find out, but there's a chance it might come back rural. And if the appraiser's not willing to consider it suburban, we'll have to find another option. So that can be the little bit of a tricky part there. I've had borrowers who want to roll the dice on those. I've had borrowers who maybe decide not to go forward with that property, and then they go find something else that's a little bit more populated. And again, population can be an indicator for you too. We do not have a specific population guideline, but that said, if you aren't sure about a property or it looks kind of borderline, go ahead and Google what the population of the area is. You might be surprised to find out there's 800 people in the whole town. Not a great indicator as far as what we're looking at for rural versus suburban areas. Good question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. I think we're all set to hand it over to Jacob, and then we'll answer the rest of the questions at the end.
Great.
Perfect. As we get the screens transitioned here, everybody, I want to just thank you again for joining us. I took a look at the attendees list here, and I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience, so that's always great. So what I'm going to be talking about here today, first we're going to cover some of the responsibilities of you guys as the correspondent lender. You know, all of you guys have had a training with me before where I've definitely talked about this stuff, but we're going to spell it out a little bit, make sure everybody kind of understands what you guys are responsible for, and then the things that the RCN folks are going to handle. So, you know, right from the jump, obviously your guys' responsibility in this whole relationship is the upfront origination of those files. So that's going to contain gathering all these initial loan details that we have spelled out here. The loan values, the property values, that guarantor experience that Chris had talked about. One of the biggest things is we need to have all of the designated contacts that are going to be involved in that loan. That's going to include all guarantors that are a part of the borrowing entity. It's going to include the title agent, which again, Chris alluded to. That's going to be very important here to help expedite the process on these files. We need the appraisal point of contact who would let them in for an inspection, and anybody else that's really going to have any type of an involvement in that deal. You guys are going to be responsible for collecting other things such as the rehab budget, if applicable, the credit and background authorization, which Chris mentioned. There's a few different ways that you guys can get that to us, one being the PDF version of the RCN application. You guys are absolutely encouraged and have the ability to use your own templates that you might already be using. And then there's always going to be that link provided in BLN where you can send your borrower the link and they can fill out an online version of that authorization form as well. Uploading the preliminary documents, so using those checklists that Chris went over earlier, those will be huge in getting those documents up there and again, expediting the process on these files. You know, if it's applicable, again, we're going to need the rent and lease information, insurance. Some of the other things to take a look at are the protocols that are listed in your RCN welcome packet. I know David Young, you guys have all spoken to him. He worked very hard on getting those protocols in place. So that'll be another good tool for you guys to look at and, you know, get an understanding of who's responsible for what. It's also a good thing to just check your email as well as Bridge Loan Network for updates and notes on your files. Your loan officers over at RCN, they're always going to be super attentive and let you know what's going on with the deals. But it is a great practice by you guys to just go in there, check things out. You know, I would say once a day is definitely good. And just make sure you're up to date on all of your files. We've got all the things that we need, and there's no outstanding actions needed by you guys, the correspondent. One of the biggest things here is going to be managing the broker and borrower expectations. So that's going to involve a number of different things, including making sure that they have an understanding, like Chris just mentioned about the appraisal, right? If there's something that might be borderline, let's temper their expectations a little bit and let them know, hey, you know, this may come back rural, so let's just consider this before we move forward. Things of that nature. That's going to include talking about the interest rate, origination points. Chris, is there anything else that you would want to add on that aspect alone?
Sorry, on mute there. No, I mean, the big things that we're looking for, you know, Jacob kind of listed those out there, but the more of this stuff that we can get, again, on the front end, that's going to be what secures this file and gets it moving quickly. And, you know, specific scenarios there, talk to your loan officer about if there's anything weird about those scenarios, as mentioned before. But if we're getting, you know, the critical data points up front, if we're getting the documentation needed up front, you know, once those files are submitted, we want to be able to order that appraisal right then and there. And that means speed for you guys. It means speed for your borrower at the end of the day, because in the current environment with everybody, you know, refinancing their homes still, appraisers are still bogged down. It's still hard to get these guys to turn things fast. They're quoting slower times and larger fees. So the more opportunity we have to use some of the you know, hybrid reports and things like that, the better off we're going to be there.
Beautiful. The other things that you guys are going to be responsible are for protecting that white label aspect of the relationship, right? Your client should really never know that RCN Capital is involved in the deal. So it's going to be up to you guys as well as your RCN loan officer to make sure that that stays consistent. We've taken a number of actions inside of the software itself to make sure that all of those white labeling relationships stay consistent in there. So just keep that in the back of your mind, right? You guys are going to be the middleman in between the client or the broker and RCN Capital, and that's the way that it should stay. Just check with your RCN team, make sure that all expectations or exceptions rather are granted before you actually promise them to the client. So if there's something and we need to get an exception on it, make sure you have the conversation with your loan officer and you get clarity on that before we make any promises to the borrower, right? Any questions on those, guys? Feel free to throw them in the chat. We'll get to them here. I'm going to cover briefly some of the responsibilities that are going to be on the RCN side of things. So RCN, really, their job is going to be checking these files, making sure that it's all filled out properly, making sure that we have all the necessary things to get it into underwriting and eventually clear to close. The first thing that they're really going to do is order that title, as Chris mentioned. That's going to help get us a jump start on the process. The other thing they're going to be responsible for is ordering the appraisal. Now, I know there are some of you folks out there that do this yourself right now, which is absolutely great. We hope to get every correspondent to that point. But for you new correspondents out there that are listening, let's let your loan officer order the appraisals on, I would say, at least the first handful of deals that you do. Once you have a better process worked out and you kind of understand the flow of things, we can absolutely set you guys up with the ability to order appraisals. But again, right now, let's just keep that on the side of RCN. They're also going to be responsible for moving that loan forward through the stages. So what you'll be able to see in there is we have that tracking pipeline bar on there. You guys will be able to see how far your loan is in the process and how close it is to closing. And again, your RCN folks, they're going to be responsible for moving that over after you've shared the deal with them. Now, they are also, like I mentioned, going to have a role in creating or continuing and maintaining that white label aspect of the relationship, right? So RCN is never going to reach out to your clients. They are only going to contact you. RCN is not going to be listed on any of the documents that go out or anything like that. So that is all going to stay consistent there. They're going to be responsible for one of the most important things, underwriting the file, right? So they'll get it into underwriting, make sure that everything's filled out properly, that we have everything we need, make sure the borrower's been approved, and then we'll move that thing into clear to close, eventually making it through the approval committee. The other things that they'll be responsible for are providing you with the document checklist, which we've referred to here today, payment links as far as getting things like credit and background paid for, appraisals, any other fees that we might have on these loan files. So any questions on those responsibilities, folks, let's go ahead and throw them in the chat there. Erica, I think we have a couple in there already. Let's go ahead and start to answer some of those.
Of course. Let me pull up the questions. We have a question that says, can we open title? On another deal, it took a while for RCN to open title and delayed closings. Can the CLs open title themselves?
I'll definitely defer to Chris on that one.
Yeah, sure. Sorry about that, mute again. So yes, you guys can start the title process. We're totally fine with that. No issue there getting it started, but still get us the contact information over as early as you can, because we want to make sure the legal team's in coordination with the title agent. So if you guys are starting that process with the title agent, let them know, like, yeah, here, go ahead and open the file on this property. We'll have our legal team reach out, once the appraisal's ordered or whatever, to kind of set expectations so that they're going to be working with your closing coordinator. Each of you guys works with a dedicated loan officer who has a dedicated processor and closing coordinator on the RCN side. So some of you guys might be familiar with Erica Ryder or Angelica Mako or Rob Capicella. Those would be the same on every single file that you guys have. So as long as you can get us over the contact information, they'll be reaching out from our legal team to make sure that title comes in the way we need it to. Good question.
Appraisals still reference RCN on them. Is there any way we can change this to BLN?
The appraisal should be coming in under Commercial Lender LLC. not RCN capital. If you have appraisals that are coming in under RCN, let your loan officer know. That's something we can change in the ordering process to make sure that they have the right lender name on there. But you should always see Commercial Lender LLC on there.
Thank you. And then another question. If every point buys down the rate 50 BPS, why does a 50 BPS broker rebate increase the rate by 50 BPS? Shouldn't it only go up by 25?
No, not necessarily. So on the rebate side, that's something that's going to be paid to you guys right outside of closing. For the earned interest over the life of the loan, the return on that takes a little bit longer for us to recoup the points discount there. And that really depends on how long the borrower is going to have the loan out for. So if they paid it off within a year, that would kind of damage us on the financial side. Whereas on the rebate, if it's a half point direct one way or the other, even if they paid it off tomorrow, we're not losing money on the deal. So it's really a cost control measure on our end to make sure we're not going to have a non-profitable loan made.
Thank you. Another question. If you have a portfolio loan with one being a refinance and the other being a purchase, can the portfolio loan calculator calculate a hybrid loan calculation?
Not at this time. Portfolio loans really don't allow for cross purposes right now. So if you had the purchase and cash outs together, we're probably going to make you wind up splitting those up. We can do, cash outs and refis can be done together, but the purchases kind of gum up the works of the pricing model, where we would probably do those properties separately. That said, if you're buying a bulk of properties, we could do two separate portfolios, one for the purchases, one for the cash out refis. If it's just one purchase property, I would just do that as a standalone.
Those are all the questions we have in the question box at this time.
Beautiful. Awesome. So any other questions on the responsibilities here, guys, feel free to throw them into the chat. I am just going to take a couple minutes in here. I know Chris kind of showed you what's new on the loan calculator. What I wanted to show you was a couple helpful tools and tips that I think you guys could find useful and help kind of speed things up for you. So just kind of tying it back to those responsibilities that we talked about, I want to make sure that everybody knows how to add a contact into a loan. We would go to the contacts tab here, and this is again where we are going to want to add your additional guarantors in addition to the primary guarantor. You're going to want to have your title agent, the closing attorney, the appraisal point of contact, and again, anybody else that's going to have a hand in this deal. So for us to add a contact again, all we have to do is hit this add contacts button, choose the individual's role in the loan. So it could be a title agent, could be a guarantor. You always have the option to select other if you don't have the option in the drop down. And then again, we have appraisal point of contact down here at the bottom as well. Once you've selected their role, you simply add their contact info. When you hit add, they will then be shown on the grid here. Again, making it super easy for you guys to know exactly who to coordinate with, but same thing on the RCN side. They know exactly how to draft up the closing docs and who to coordinate with on title and things of that nature. One of the other cool tricks in here, guys, that I don't think many of you are aware of, there is an ability to carry over documents if you have a repeat borrower. So let's say, for example, this demo borrower here, this person had done a few different loans with you of recently, right? If that was the case, you guys actually have the opportunity to come over to this little document button over here. If I hover over that, it says get documents. If I select that, this is going to show me all the documents that we have attached to this borrower via previous loans. Now, obviously, some of these documents are going to expire, like a credit or a background report or appraisal, obviously. But if you have something like articles of incorporation or something like that that's going to be applicable for a new loan for that individual, you can literally just carry over those documents by checking the box, hitting add selected documents, and it will grab those documents from those previous loans and upload it directly to the documents tab of this current loan file that we're working in. So I know that a lot of you guys probably weren't aware of that. That's one of the more nitty-gritty things of BLN that we don't necessarily cover on our demos. But that's a really good tool for you guys. I think that can help a lot of you guys out in expediting the process and carrying over some of those documents that can be still applicable. Speaking of the documents, I just want to reiterate how we can get documents into the software and kind of the procedure as far as getting those documents in there. So utilizing those tools that we went over today, the checklist that Chris showed you and the ones that your processors will be providing you, you will have the ability to upload documents to that loan file by coming here and hitting the green Add Files button, selecting those documents. You can always drag and drop into the white text box, or, as I'm sure you've all heard me say before, you can use my favorite feature, which is the branded secure document upload link. Again, if you copy this link and you send it off to your borrower, they will actually have the ability to upload docs directly to the loan file. Again, they can do that without logging into BLN, without the ability of using a password at all, and then most importantly, they can do that without the fear of those documents getting intercepted, because again, that's a completely secure link. Now, most important part about the documents, folks, once they are uploaded, they are first going to show down here in the bottom in this Files to be Reviewed section. Once the document shows up there, your job with that document is finished. You are hands off at that point. Your loan officer and their processor will come here. They will review the document, make sure it's been filled out appropriately. They will also name the document appropriately and categorize it. Once they have done that, you will see the document appear in the grid up here above. You guys will always have the ability to select and download those documents as I just did there. And then anything you see with this red font, that's going to indicate a final document that has been, that will be or has been reviewed by the underwriting team. The only other thing that I would mention about documents, folks, is when you are uploading those documents yourself, make sure that those documents are saved with a descriptive file name. That way your loan officer at RCN, when they go into that file, they kind of have an idea of what they're opening up without having to read through the entire document to find out what it is. Chris, anything you would want to add here before we answer any other questions?
Yeah, the other thing I would say is when it comes to documentation, if borrowers are sending you stuff with, 4, 5, 6 different documents, but it's all in one PDF, try to get those broken up so it's a little bit easier to decipher what those are, and then that way we can also break them down within the system here based on what the condition it needs to be tagged to. If they come over as one lump sum, it's a lot longer process to get those docs reviewed, split up, and everything on our end. So if you guys can lend a hand there, that makes a big difference. I would also say if you can label the documents, with what they actually are, like, even if it's just articles of incorporation, if you just put articles on it, that'll be enough to at least identify what we should expect to see when we open that. But we see a lot of them come through where it's just some random scan and it has a bunch of letters and numbers.
Document 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, exactly. It makes it a little tough to read those things and try to decipher what you're doing. But at any point, if you can kind of give us a heads up of like, just sent you, these 3 items, I sent you the budget, the contract, and the application. Great. I know what to expect when we open up that file. If you just said, hey, uploaded a bunch of docs, all right, now we got to go digging through, and then it becomes a little bit of a forensic dissection of what's in the file. So speed, again, is the key for making sure these move quickly. So the more of that information you can have, differentiated up front, the more that helps with getting these files moved.
Yeah, and on that same vein, Chris, I would also mention, let's stick to uploading things that are actually required. I know borrowers or brokers can have a tendency to just send you anything that they think should be applicable to the loan. But you have those document checklists, so let's stick to that. If it's not required, let's not muck it up by adding those files into the software here. That's going to really irritate the processors, I can tell you that much. So if there is anything that you get from the borrower that we're not really requiring, let's just refrain from uploading it into the software. If the loan officer or the processor ever need that, they'll obviously let you know.
Yeah, the most common ones we see there are the tax returns and pay stubs and things like that. We do not collect any of that stuff. You don't have to ask your borrowers for it. I couldn't tell you the last time I actually see somebody's tax return. That said, people send them to us all the time thinking it's going to be helpful. Really isn't necessarily going to be a benefit to the system. And if it's one less thing you have to ask the borrower for, all the better.
Erica, let's go ahead and hammer out the rest of these questions.
Sure. We have a question in there that says, is there any option to use the same appraisal report from bridge loan for long-term rental and make the process faster for refinancing?
Yeah, good question. Unfortunately, usually doesn't work out that way. The bridge appraisals that we get when we're doing a rehab, generally, the after repair value there is based on a lot of assumptions. Those assumptions will not be tolerated when it comes to the 30-year appraisal requirements. So we do need a separate report there. The other part of that equation is appraisals at best are good for 120 days. Most of the time we get those coming off of rehab anyway. They're more than 120 days from our original appraisal date anyhow. So, but one of the things we can do is we can request that the same appraiser does the report if you guys were happy with the upfront report. And that's a good way to kind of get ahead of the curve a little bit with the appraiser and be able to feel confident about the value that's going to come back.
Thank you. And another question we have is, under what condition is a soft credit pull acceptable rather than a hard credit pull?
A soft credit pull is never a substitute for a hard pull. On every file, we do need the hard pull done. What we use the soft pull for, though, is really for informational purposes. So some of you guys might have come across this before, particularly on a 30-year deal. We see this a lot where the borrower misses qualifying for the right credit tier by a point or two. So then they get some credit repair work done. They come back and they say, great, my score is now up to 730. Can you re-pull it? Generally, what we like to do before we re-pull it is to do that soft pull, see if we get an indication that the score actually is on the rise. If I don't see that indicator in there, I really don't want to pull their credit again because that'll potentially reduce their score at that point. So really, it's there to kind of protect us from having to just guess and hope that the borrower was right that their score went up. Sometimes they are right. Had one last week though where the guy said, "Oh yeah, the score should be great now," and his score came in at a 597. So he was a little off. So we want.
What do you mean that's
use
not
that
great?
as a tool to make sure that they're going to hit the mark, so to speak.
Yeah, I would also say, Chris, the soft credit pull could be used on a new client of yours. It could be good to screen a new person. If somebody says, "Yeah, I'm right on the brink of 700," that's probably somebody I would want to kind of screen just to make sure that before we do a bunch of legwork on a deal, that it's actually going to be something that we're going to ultimately be able to fund.
Mm-hmm.
Those are all the questions we have in the chat box at this time.
Great. Well, just want to say thank you again, guys, for joining us today. Believe me, we're seeing the benefits of this on our end. As far as the processing times are getting better, and you guys are getting a better understanding of what the expectations are and how best to communicate and work through these loans. So really appreciate you guys' participation here. Give us some feedback as well about other items you might want to have covered in a future session, and we can certainly drill down on those items and get you whatever you guys are looking for as far as additional education. But you guys have really stepped up your game as lenders, and that speaks volumes about the hard work you guys and your teams have put into this to make it as good as possible. So really appreciate that. I'd like to thank Jacob from Bridge Loan Network again for joining us today. Jacob is a constant support system for you guys and your teams to be able to work through the system issues and things like that. So you should all know and be in contact with Jacob anytime you have issues there. Thank you again to Erica of the marketing department here for hosting us and putting this together. Jacob, any final words?
The only thing I'll say, Chris, is thank you again to everybody, and I apologize to those folks that I had already talked to today and you had to hear me for another half hour this afternoon.
Well said.
But again, thank you, everybody. Thanks, Chris.
If you guys are looking for a copy of the recording or any of the materials, please reach out to us. We can get that out to you after the webinar.
Yes, we should have a recording
Have a great rest of your day.
Tomorrow. So check your emails tomorrow. You should have a recording of this for you guys. If you don't receive it, just send us an email. We'll send one out to you guys.
Perfect. Great. Thanks, everybody.
Have a great rest of your day, folks.